So let's just take a look at, this is from the Weston Price Foundation's guidelines for how much food somebody should be consuming and what sources of food in order to meet their daily guidelines. It is a fairly bonkers amount of calories that just about nobody is going to really get into doing in full force unless you are somebody who's so active. And remembering that I think a lot of this was developed at a time in the 1920s when, and based on what traditional cultures were eating, so their lives were far more active. They were burning a lot more calories every day, and it was a really different existence. So we're going to extrapolate from this what important nutrients are necessary for a healthy pregnancy, but then it will have to be modified based on how much a person is interested in eating in this way. But most people are not going to eat this quantity. However, this is what's recommended. And so since most of us are not going to eat this quantity, a prenatal supplement then does the job of literally supplementing what should be primarily coming from food sources. So whole raw milk is recommended, 4 cups a day. No, thank you. Nobody's going to do that. Plus an additional 4 tablespoons of butter from grass-fed cows. So I'm sure we can encourage people to eat more butter. And if they're going to consume milk, to consume it in the form of ideally an unpasteurized form from healthy cows that are raised on pasture, and avoiding homogenized and pasteurized dairy products, which means for many people, they're going to be avoiding dairy altogether, and that's okay. 2 eggs a day, which I think is good advice. For vegetarians, it might need to be even 3 to 4 eggs a day once they're pregnant. Seafood 2 to 4 times a week. And that's how we're getting all the, saturated fat, cholesterols, omega-3s, this whole plethora of different vitamins and minerals. From oily fish, primarily, salmon, sardines is an incredible source of omega-3s. And as I've mentioned, those are small fish that are low on the food chain and have less of an environmental impact. Same with things like herring, anchovies, trout. Fish roe it's got like 17,000 units of vitamin D per tablespoon. So a little bit of fish roe is profoundly nutrient dense, and to me gives us that doctrine of signatures around how important vitamin D is for our egg health, because it is so replete in fish roe. I think that's an indication that it definitely plays a role in how healthy the egg DNA is going to be. Shellfish, lobster, crab, prawns. Now, all of these things are healthy ways to get these nutrients, except we're in a situation now where there's a lot of pollution and there's a lot of issues with toxicity in our seafood. So that creates a scenario where it's difficult to balance what patients should be consuming for their nutrient health versus what they can tolerate from a toxicity standpoint. So generally, I do not recommend seafood more than twice a week. I do encourage my patients to stick with either always wild caught fish from the safe list in terms of mercury and other toxins that can accumulate, and sardines, and definitely fish roe, but a couple times a week. And then from the standpoint of liver, a couple of ounces, 3 to 4 ounces once or twice a week is enough, or taking the fermented cod liver oil. So these are things that, people are not necessarily consuming every single day. And then it gets into, consuming meat every day, coconut oil every day, cultured foods, some for every meal. And whenever you're eating grains, making sure that they're properly prepared. But I don't really think people need to eat grains. I think a lot of people do fine without them, except vegetarians do need to eat soaked and sprouted grains combined together, I think, to get adequate amounts of amino acids in their bodies. So if you're eating grains, try to have them be soaked or sprouted, or just have white rice that doesn't need to be soaked because the hull has been removed, and cook it in bone broth and add grass-fed butter and Celtic sea salt. And now you've used that rice as a medium for holding a whole bunch of superfoods. If you enjoy eating grains, but you don't digest them well because of that hull. So these are some of the pregnancy recommendations for calcium. We're looking for 1,000 milligrams a day, but if you're eating a cup of plain yogurt or some whole milk or some cheddar cheese every day, you don't really need to take the calcium. So I don't usually recommend people take an extra calcium dose because most everybody is getting enough from the food that they eat or close to it, and then there'll be a little bit in the prenatal. Want to make sure that if they are taking calcium, they're also taking more magnesium so that they don't end up having an imbalance because they're getting so much from the diet and from the supplementation. Choline is an important nutrient that you want to look for in a prenatal vitamin, but also it's going to be present in eggs, in meat, in salmon and chicken. So and it helps prevent neural tube defects, and it's for brain development. It's an important supplement, but if you have a patient who is eating in this way, they're likely getting plenty of choline, but still just making sure it's there as an insurance policy in a prenatal is a good idea. DHA is the omega that has been specifically studied around brain development and vision and egg quality, but I prefer that people take a complete omega and not just isolate only the DHA. I don't always know where those sources of it are, and I don't really see the point. I just think if we're going to take fish oils, let's take all 3 omegas. And again, if people are eating fish a few times a week, they're probably getting enough, and they also supplementing with the fermented cod liver oil. Folic acid, so the dosage is 600 or up to 800 micrograms. And this is, again, recommended for 3 months before you become pregnant to avoid neural tube defects. But, it's synthetic. So we want to be getting it from food or from folate or methylated folate for anyone with MTHFR or anyone that you suspect is having issues around detoxification. Iron, we're looking for a pretty low dose of 27 to 45 milligrams, which can certainly be gotten from food. So avoiding it in a prenatal unless lab work is showing anemia is a good idea because it can lead to constipation. Vitamin B6 can help with nausea. And these are there's food sources as well as what is recommended, but just keep in mind that any prenatal vitamin is going to give you the recommended dosage or more. So most of the time you don't have to get too focused on these individual dosages unless you're starting to prescribe things outside of the basic prenatal that isn't a food-based supplement. So we know B12, we need intrinsic factor if we're going to take it as vegans because it won't assimilate it. It's only found in animal products, and it assists with red blood cell production. So and with energy assimilation. So it's really, really important that we have adequate levels of B12 for pregnancy. We've already talked a ton about vitamin D. 4,000 IUs is the RDA for, actually I think it's lower than that. Oh, maybe it's not, I don't know. 4,000 IU is the RDA for pregnancy, but again, we want to be looking at their blood work and adjust dosages based on that and recheck frequently. And then the foods we've already discussed. Zinc is an important mineral for cell growth and for repair. So making sure that there's some zinc and other trace minerals as well in the prenatal, and then working to get it from food sources. But you can see, I mean, so many of these food sources cross over, and that's because these are the foods that are replete with the nutrients that human beings require. And so for us to be avoiding things like organ meats or fatty fish or eggs in our diet, when each of them has so many nutrients that are necessary for healthy pregnancy, healthy cell division, healthy cell membrane, all that stuff, then we can see we can really get this stuff from eating if we're focused.